Please welcome Barri Rafferty, Executive Vice President, Corporate Communications with Wells Fargo, Delana Brand, Vice President of People and Experience and Head of Inclusion and Diversity at Twitter, Ian Sohn, President and Chief Client Officer with Hawkeye, and Jarett Hausske, President at 11.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jarett Hausske. I am the president of the creative agency headquartered in San Francisco called 11. I am humbled to have been asked to moderate a critically important and timely discussion on caring for the caregivers, and grateful to be joined by three incredibly impressive thought leaders, each with unique perspectives on the subject. Before I do a quick introduction of them, it's probably good to get grounded in the topic at hand, at the heart of which is the ongoing balancing act of caregiving and career building that has unquestionably been amplified and exacerbated by the pandemic. Many parents have lost access to school, to childcare, and to the support of extended family. Many are simultaneously caring for their children and ailing parents or loved ones, and a disproportionate share of this burden falls on women, with working women currently spending an average of 15 hours a week, more than men on unpaid caregiving. And beyond the time sacrifices, the emotional, physical, mental, and financial strain of being full-time parents, part-time teachers, and committed employees is very, very real. Luckily, we have some panelists that are actively tackling these issues and addressing the question we've been asked to discuss today, which is how can companies step up to support caregivers during the pandemic and beyond? So a quick introduction of our panelists. We have Delana Brand, who is the VP of People Experience and Head of Inclusion and Diversity at Twitter. Delana has worked at numerous Fortune 500 companies designing innovative employee-centric programs. She is a fierce advocate, industry contributor, speaker, coach, mentor on topics of equality, gender pay, equity, diversity, and inclusion at both the organizational level and within her community, and is leading some fascinating changes at Twitter, which we'll talk about today. Barri Rafferty is the head of corporate communications for Wells Fargo, where her team cares for 266,000 employees. It's kind of mind-blowing. Prior to joining Wells Fargo in July, Barri was the president and CEO of Ketchum, the first woman at the time to be a CEO of a top 5 PR agency. She has been a strong advocate of diversity and inclusion, a founding member of Omni Women, an initiative to increase women in leadership. And I highly recommend you tune into her TEDx talk, in which she shares some of the perspectives and experiences that have shaped her thinking. And then last but not least, Ian Sohn is the president and chief client officer of Hawkeye, which is the largest CRM agency in North America, part of the Publicis Group. Ian has split his career between roles on the client side and agency side. Last year, he wrote a LinkedIn post on work-life balance that went viral, landing on the New York Times, New York Post, USA Today, and creating a lot of conversation. We'll talk about that today too. So the first question for the group, we know that caregivers are increasingly needing and asking for more flexibility in the workplace. It would be great to hear about some of the programs and policies that you have put in place at the organizations you represent to support a more flexible workplace, and what some of those learnings and successes have been. I'd love to start with Delana, as I know you've been leading a very progressive policies and programs at Twitter around this subject. So.
Sure. Thank you for the question and the opportunity to share. Starting with the pandemic, and this is where a lot of caregivers are having stress and pressure now, Twitter formalized a number of processes really early on, and we're one of the first companies to announce that employees would be working from home. And so it's important to note that that adjustment period and that transition wasn't new for us, because we had already been on a journey to decentralizing our workforce and allowing for remote work, all in the spirit of really inclusion and diversity, and trying to balance things out more for all of our diverse communities, but including women. And so this allowed us to really focus on what mattered most, which is the well-being of all of our tweeps, or employees as we call them, and really launch programs that met employees where they were, and their individual needs, and leaning on sort of a culture of listening and learning. And so some of the things that we did, in May, we announced a permanent work from home option. So irrespective of COVID and even post-COVID, tweeps can choose if they want to come back into the offices when we reopen those in 2021, or if they want to continue to just work from home, because again, we were already on that journey. We introduced numerous options, adding to what we already had around flexible schedules and short-term leaves for people that had needs and needed to care for individuals, either due to COVID directly, for illnesses, or just for the homeschooling and lots of situations that have occurred. We did productivity allowances to allow people to get themselves set up so that they could show up and be most productive in their homework environment. Introduced across different teams things like no meeting Fridays to give people sort of those much needed breaks. And also, really importantly, introduce some new company holidays, as we're calling them, company days of rest. We've had 2 so far. We'll have another one coming up in August, and they're meant to intentionally just give people permission to pause and to rest, because we understand that the stress and pressures in the current environment are really, really difficult and challenging. So there were a host of options that we made available. And as I said, this is a part of a broader strategic intent and strategy to really, really make sure that we are creating a more equitable and inclusive environment by allowing for choice and flexibility in terms of how people work and work where it's best for them, which, as we know, really levels the playing field for women in particular.
That's great. And we'll, the culture of listening and learning is something I want to dive into in one of the next questions. Barri, I'd love to hear from you. I know that you at Ketchum, has a predominantly female workforce, and you were one of the first organizations in the country to move to remote work. Love to just hear your experiences and some of the learnings you had in that change.
Yeah, thanks, Jarett. Excuse me. We was interesting because at Ketchum we were at 100% flexible workforce before we went into COVID, and yet we redefined flexibility during COVID. Because I would say when people worked from home before, they had their children in childcare, right? And they didn't have the parent burdens. So we really had to rethink what flexibility meant. And for some people, that meant 2 hours on, 2 hours off, trading off with their partners. For others, that meant starting early in the morning, taking time off to get the kids ready for school. And then what we tried to do is, make sure during the day they had that flexibility. One of the things at Wells Fargo, where we had essential workers going in, they had to find childcare. And so Wells Fargo created an additional childcare backup option, which actually allowed eligible employees to get $100 a day reimbursement for those who obtained childcare in their personal network. And I think that's unique, right? Because a lot of times people had their kids in daycare programs, but now needed to find new options. They also allowed for people to take 5 business days to find that childcare and support before they needed to go back in. And certainly the other key has been for all of us that have essential workers is providing safe environments for them to work in, and also things like creating opportunities for them to have lunch in, things like that, so that they actually didn't have to leave the work environment once they were in that safe place. So there's been a lot of work, I think, for all of us to create not only flexibility in new and unique ways, but also safety for our employees that we need to have in the office supporting others or in the workplace supporting the services that we need.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the research shows that the lack of flexibility in the childcare, not just flexibility of working where you work, but childcare coverage is one of the big things we need to tackle systematically and systemically across organizations. I'd love to jump into the something, Delana, that you said around the culture of listening. I think we know that the current environment, there's a lot of insecurity at the moment and some fear that employees have about being seen as lesser than contributors if they raise a voice or if they speak out about the things they need. And I'd love to hear how you share kind of some of the things you've done at Twitter around the culture of listening and learning, and how you've given the employees, the tweets a voice in the policies you guys have created.
Yeah, thank you. That is for us one of the most important things that we've done during this period, and it really is just sort of the culture of Twitter. We're about conversation, and conversations, we all know, starts with listening. For us, we knew that we were going to have to rapidly solution. It's a new environment. Everyone was sort of struggling in their own different ways, and as we started to think about building programs, policies, initiatives, et cetera, to support our tweet force, caregivers in particular, we wanted to meet their needs. And the most important way to do that is to listen to them directly and ask them, what are the challenges that they're dealing with? What are the things that are most concerning to them? What are the things that they would love the company to support and to solution on their behalf? And so we did a few things. One, we launched what we call our Pulse survey. It's our normal employee engagement survey, but we did a custom one specifically for caregivers in the organization globally, so that they could give us feedback on all the things that they would like to see support in, areas of support, or things that they were just really truly struggling with. And a lot of the things that I called out earlier in terms of flexible options that maybe didn't exist previously, and leaves and all those sort of things, it came directly from their feedback. So we solutioned with them in mind, which I think is really, really powerful. The other things that we did is just sometimes you just have to give voice to the struggle and the pain and acknowledge it. And so we had several sessions that we call flock talks, which are listening sessions, just that. It provides a platform of conversation and learning and support where people can share their struggles. People can share advice, wisdom, and caregivers can learn and grow together in the environment. And then finally, the other example I will share, because I think it cannot be underestimated just how difficult working and caregiving is in a normal environment, but certainly in our present environment, there are so many additional burdens and anxiety and stress that everyone is under. And so we acknowledge that. And I'm really, really proud that we were able to partner with a lot of our healthcare providers and actually bring some psychologists, clinically trained psychologists, on board to meet with caregivers. I think we were able to touch 600 people who wanted to engage in these services and just have discussions specifically talking about how caregivers need to care for themselves, and how they need to focus on their own self-care and well-being so they can show up for the individuals that they're supposed to be supporting, in addition to do their best job at work. And so it's really the old saying of putting on your oxygen mask before you're caring for others. We wanted to give them the time and space to do that during work to help them improve.
To me, it's one of the really interesting things that's come out of the last couple of months is the destigmatization of people being able to feel and express their insecurity or their fears or their anxieties in a professional environment. If you're a sports fan, you know that football season is starting soon, and there have been a number of players in the last couple of days who have opted out of the season because they have at-risk people at home, or they don't feel safe, or they're focusing on other things. And it's nice to see other players celebrate their colleagues opt out of the season, right? It's actually really validating that these big macho guys can say, yeah, we get it. We understand that you can feel as anxious as anyone. So it's nice.
No, that's totally true. I think one of the things we also thought about at Ketchum was listening to each other, and we created an intranet that had caregivers in it. And what I found is the robustness. They were sharing articles, they were sharing support for each other, photos of just funny things that happened, school and science experiments that were like parent tested that, you could do with your kids during the day, or even ways to keep them busy while you were on a call. The other thing that we heard at Wells Fargo that was interesting was the financial strain that was happening during this time. And so one of the things that Wells Fargo did is they have a We Care fund, which is usually used for catastrophic disasters where people need financial support. And they actually have now provided more than 21,000 people in the company, more than 24 million in support for helping to provide for them during this time. And I think, one of the lessons learned is it's not just about policy and about listening, but it's about if employees are asking for help, how do you provide that help and support? And so I think that, that's been a lesson too, as so many times we're giving back to our communities, and how do we make sure we actually really give back and listen to our employees as well?
It's interesting with Barry, when you start talking, I was thinking that one of us were maybe scripted, going to have one of our children come here as a form of destigmatizing that. But I want to go to Ian, something you said about destigmatizing, just the realities of the moment. I know that one of the conversations we had last week was just the importance of modeling behaviors as leaders. And I know that you got a lot of attention for writing your LinkedIn post, which was a form of, in some ways, being vulnerable and trying to, destigmatize some of these antiquated beliefs. Can you share just your experience of that process and just your perspective on how important modeling behavior is?
Yeah, I think I've always been really honest with people who I work with and people who work with me. And I think they've seen that over the years. And I've always believed that there's a big gap between policy and behavior. So we can set all the policy we want, but what people look at really is how we as leaders behave. And they take their cues off that, right? And so when they see us behaving in a really human, vulnerable way, they feel safe to do that themselves, or to raise their hands and say, I don't know what to do, or I don't know how to handle this. So I think we as leaders have to be really conscious of the fact that a lot of eyes are on us right now, and everything we do, from what we say to our body language to how we communicate to when we communicate, is all being watched very carefully, because people are trying to figure out what's acceptable and what's not, and how vulnerable they can be. And so I've just found myself trying to be as honest as possible about how I feel. Yesterday, I had a terrible day yesterday. I just felt terrible. I was in a bad mood. I was cranky, and I was very honest about it. And I actually shut down at like 4:00 because I just said, I'm just not a good version of myself today. And if I can say that out loud, I think other people feel like they have the permission to do the same.
I love that. I think you and I must have been in the same place yesterday. Delana, there's something I thought that you guys as organizations, leaders, did some actually purposefully worked as leaders to destigmatize. You have story time. Can you just tell about a couple of things real quickly that you guys do just to kind of show caregiving in real life?
Absolutely. I can't stress enough what Ian has talked about really creating an environment that is acceptable of sort of the current situations and destigmatizing the work from home realities. And our leaders have really shown up and led with empathy and reset expectations. And so some of the things that they've been doing, which has gone a long way just to make everyone feel like it's okay, is introducing things like story time, which is a hour-long opportunity for a leader in the organization, including our CEO, Jack Dorsey, who kicked this program off, to read a book to the children of our tweeps. That really created not just a fun opportunity for the children, but really made the caregivers, the parents in our organization, feel totally seen and heard. And that it was okay for them to truly bring, because a lot of organizations talk about bringing your whole self to work, but truly be able to bring the current environment into their work arrangements. We also recently introduced Camp Twitter, which is summer camp for children. And so we know that a lot of summer programs are still closed down, schools are still closed down, et cetera, daycares. And so creating opportunities for children to have something to do while their parents are actually working, again, creating an environment where it's okay. And then smaller things like giving permission to turn your screen off if there's chaos all around you, or making it acceptable for kids to be on their parents' lap or to interrupt. Like we've made and given permission for people to just show up and exist, and not have to worry about being judged, because it may not be all perfect and buttoned up, because there never is perfect and buttoned up, but certainly not in our current environment right now.
Hey, Delana, I just have to let you know that after you talked about that when we met last week, the story time in the camp Twitter, I told my good friend and colleague, Liz Taylor, who's the Chief Creative Officer at Leo Burnett, about those two things. And we were just both so delighted by the ideas that maybe we'll steal them. I don't know.
I encourage you to. Like, this
I figured you would.
I figured for everybody. Yeah.
All right. Well, here's this subject. Honestly, I was thinking this morning we could spend 2-3 hours on this subject and going really deep, but we've run out of time. So thank you all for everything you guys are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.